Morgan Chen gripped his leather armrest as the plane hit another patch of turbulence. Outside the window of the Boeing 787, dark clouds swirled against the night sky. As the CEO of Chentech Global, he was used to smooth flights in private jets, but today's urgent meeting in San Francisco had forced him onto a commercial red-eye to New York. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" Morgan looked up to see a flight attendant standing in the aisle. Her name tag read Elise. She had warm brown eyes and a professional smile that somehow seemed genuine despite the late hour. "No, thank you," he replied, turning back to the financial report on his tablet. The failed acquisition meeting weighed heavily on his mind. 12 hours of negotiations wasted. His board would not be pleased. Elise Summers moved down the aisle, checking on other first-class passengers. After 15 years as a flight attendant, she could spot the different types of travelers easily. The nervous flyers, the entitled complainers, the tired business people. This man in seat 3 was clearly the successful but distracted type. His expensive watch and custom suit told one story, but the deep worry lines around his eyes told another. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," a voice crackled over the intercom. "We're experiencing some unexpected severe weather ahead. For your safety, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Denver. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." Morgan sighed heavily. A delay was the last thing he needed. His phone buzzed with an email from his assistant about tomorrow's meetings. You would have to reschedule everything. 30 minutes later, the plane touched down roughly on the Denver runway. Rain lashed against the windows as passengers gathered their belongings. "The airline is working to find hotel accommodations," Elise announced to the cabin. "However, due to a convention in the city and the storm, options are limited. Please check with the gate agents." By midnight, the airport had become a makeshift hotel. Most passengers had claimed spots on floors and benches. The storm had shut down roads, and all nearby hotels were full. Morgan sat in a corner of the first-class lounge, which was now overcrowded with elite status passengers. His assistant had tried but failed to find him private accommodations. For the first time in years, his money and connections couldn't solve his problem. "Mind if I sit here? Every other spot is taken." Morgan looked up to see Elise, now in her regular clothes instead of her uniform. She held a cup of coffee and looked as tired as he felt. "Please," he said, moving his laptop bag. "Thanks. Crazy night, right?" Elise settled into the chair across from him. "I've been flying this route for 5 years and never had to stop in Denver." Morgan nodded. "Bad timing. I had important meetings tomorrow morning." "Important enough to change the weather?" Elise asked with a small smile. Morgan surprised himself by laughing. "I wish my power extended that far. I'm Elise, by the way, off duty now, obviously. Morgan Chen." A flash of recognition crossed her face. "Chentech, right? I read about your company's new medical devices last month." Morgan raised an eyebrow, surprised. Most people knew him for his wealth, not his work. "My mother has early Alzheimer's," Elise explained. "I follow all the new research and technology." Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the lounge for a brief moment. The storm showed no signs of stopping, trapping 2 people from completely different worlds in the same small corner of an airport at midnight. Neither Morgan nor Elise realized it yet, but this unexpected detour was about to change both their lives forever. 3 hours had passed since Morgan and Elise first started talking. The airport lounge had grown quieter as most passengers drifted off to sleep on makeshift beds of jackets and carry-on items. Outside, the storm continued to rage, lightning occasionally illuminating the large windows. "So you wanted to be a doctor before becoming a flight attendant?" Morgan asked, genuinely interested. He had long forgotten about his emails and the failed business meeting. Elise nodded, wrapping her hands around her 3rd cup of coffee. "I finished pre-med, actually. Then Mom got sick, and medical school became impossible. Too expensive, too time-consuming." "You gave up your dream for your mother," Morgan said. Not a question, but a statement of understanding. "Some things matter more than our plans," Elise replied simply. "Flying lets me work 3 days on, 4 days off, perfect for being her caregiver." Morgan thought about his own father, who had passed away just 6 months ago. While Morgan had been closing a billion-dollar deal in Tokyo, his father had died alone in a hospital room. The memory still haunted him. "I understand sacrifice," he said quietly, but sometimes I wonder if I've sacrificed the wrong things. An announcement echoed through the terminal. Due to continued severe weather, all departing flights remain cancelled until further notice. Updates will be provided at 6 a.m. Elias sighed. Looks like we're here for the night. Tell me something, Morgan. What does a billionaire worry about, besides flight delays, I mean? Her direct question caught him off guard. People rarely asked him personal questions. They asked about investments, technology, or his opinion on economic trends. Never about his worries. Empty success, he answered honestly, surprising himself. Building something huge that somehow feels hollow. That's not what I expected you to say, Elise admitted. Morgan smiled slightly. What did you expect? Money problems? Maybe which island to buy next or something. She laughed. Islands are overrated. High maintenance. They both laughed, and Morgan realized it was the first genuine laugh he'd had in months. An elderly man shuffled past their corner, looking confused and distressed. Excuse me, Elise said to Morgan before standing up. Sir, are you okay? Do you need help finding something? The old man looked relieved. My medication. I think I left it on the plane. Let me help you, Elise said gently. I'm a flight attendant. I can get us back there. Morgan watched as Elise spoke with an airport worker, showing her airline ID. Within minutes, she was escorting the elderly man through a security door. When she returned 20 minutes later, she had the man's medication bag in hand. Crisis averted, she said, sitting back down. You're good at that, Morgan observed. Solving problems, helping people. Small problems, Elise shrugged. Not changing the world problems like you deal with. Morgan shook his head. That man's world would have been pretty terrible tonight without his medication. Sometimes the small problems are the only ones that really matter. Elise studied him for a moment. You're not what I expected, Morgan Chen. What did you expect? Someone more. She searched for the right word. Isolated from ordinary life. The lights in the terminal flickered as thunder boomed outside. Maybe I am, Morgan admitted. My assistant handles my dry cleaning. My chef plans my meals. My driver takes me everywhere. I don't even remember the last time I pumped my own gas. Sounds lonely, Elise said softly. Morgan looked out at the storm, then back at this woman he'd just met, who somehow seemed to see right through him. Yes, he said simply. It is. In the quiet of that airport lounge, surrounded by strangers yet somehow feeling more connected than he had in years, Morgan Chen, who could buy almost anything, realized he might have found something money couldn't purchase. Genuine understanding. Dawn broke over Denver International Airport, casting a pale orange glow through the massive windows. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind clear skies and the promise of departing flights. Morgan checked his phone, now buzzing constantly with messages from his executive team. Looks like they're boarding my flight in an hour, Elise said, stretching her arms above her head. She had managed to sleep for about an hour, curled up in the airport chair. Morgan nodded, feeling strangely disappointed. Their night of conversation had created a bubble separate from reality, a space where job titles and bank accounts didn't matter. Soon that bubble would burst. I should thank you, he said, putting his phone down. For what? Keeping you from getting a proper night's sleep, Elise smiled. For reminding me what real life looks like, Morgan answered seriously. I've been living in boardrooms and five-star hotels for so long that I forgot. Elise studied his face. And I should thank you for listening to me talk about mom and medical school. Most people get uncomfortable when I mention Alzheimer's. The morning announcement system crackled to life, listing the newly scheduled departure times. Both Morgan and Elise would be leaving within the next 2 hours, heading to different cities and back to their separate lives. Morgan suddenly sat up straighter. I have an idea. Should I be worried? Elise raised an eyebrow. You said you volunteer at a community health clinic on weekends, Morgan asked. Yes, in Queens. Why? Let me come volunteer there. One day, that's all I'm asking. Elise looked confused. You want to volunteer at an underfunded clinic in one of the poorest neighborhoods in New York? Yes, Morgan said firmly. I want to see your world, Elise. Just once. She laughed, clearly not believing him. The great Morgan Chen passing out clipboards and helping old ladies fill out insurance forms. I can't picture it. Try, he challenged. And in return, you come to my charity gala next month. See my world too. Elise's smile faded. A fancy party with wealthy people? I don't belong there. Neither do I at your clinic, Morgan pointed out. That's the whole idea. The airport was coming alive around them. Business travelers straightened their suits while families gathered their scattered belongings. The normal rhythm of travel was resuming. One day in each other's worlds, Morgan continued. Then we go back to our lives. No strings, no expectations. Why? Elise asked, genuinely curious. What's the point? Morgan considered this. Because in 12 hours of conversation, you've made me think more about what matters than anyone has in years. And because when that plane lands in New York, we'll go back to lives that never would have crossed paths otherwise. Elise was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. The clinic address is on the back. We're open Saturdays from 8 to 4. I'm there this weekend. Morgan took the card, then handed her his private business card, not the standard company one, but the one with his personal cell number. The gala is March 15th at the Metropolitan Museum. Text me if you'll come. Their flights were announced within minutes of each other. As they gathered their belongings, an awkward moment passed between them, more than strangers but less than friends, caught in a strange in-between. You won't show up, Elise said, but her tone was light, almost hopeful that she was wrong. And you won't text me about the gala, Morgan replied with a small smile. They shook hands formally, the moment stretching longer than necessary. Then they walked in opposite directions toward different gates, both telling themselves they were being ridiculous. Neither looked back, both assuming this strange night was just a momentary detour in their separate journeys. Neither expected to follow through on their unusual promise. Both were wrong. 2 weeks later, Elise was checking in a mother with 2 coughing children when she glanced at the clinic door. She froze mid-sentence. Morgan Chen stood in the entrance of Queen's Community Health Center, wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater instead of his usual tailored suit. He looked around uncertainly, taking in the peeling paint and crowded waiting room. Excuse me one moment, Elise told the mother, handing her a clipboard. She walked over to Morgan, unable to hide her surprise. You actually came. I said I would, Morgan replied simply. He seemed slightly uncomfortable but determined. The clinic director, Dr. Rivera, approached them. Elise, is this the volunteer you mentioned? Her tone was skeptical as she assessed Morgan. Yes, this is Morgan. He's a friend who wanted to help today. Dr. Rivera handed Morgan a volunteer badge. We're short-staffed as usual. Can you file paperwork? I can learn, Morgan said. Elise watched as Dr. Rivera led Morgan to the back office, still not quite believing he had shown up. She had told no one who he really was. By mid-morning, the clinic was overwhelmed with patients. Flu season had hit the neighborhood hard, and the waiting room was packed with coughing, feverish people of all ages. Morgan emerged from the filing room looking frustrated. Your system is completely inefficient. These paper records are a disaster. Welcome to underfunded healthcare, Elise said. Not everyone has electronic medical record systems. Before Morgan could respond, an elderly man collapsed near the check-in desk. Elise rushed over, kneeling beside him. Mr. Guzman, can you hear me? She checked his pulse while calling out, Dr. Rivera, we need help. Morgan watched as Elise efficiently took the man's blood pressure and helped move him to an exam room. Her medical training was evident in every movement. You're wasted as a flight attendant, Morgan said when she returned. Elise shrugged. Life doesn't always go as planned. As the day progressed, Morgan moved from filing to helping patients complete forms. Many couldn't read English well, and he surprised Elise by speaking Spanish with several families and Mandarin with an elderly Chinese couple. Where did you learn that? She asked during their brief lunch break, granola bars eaten while standing. My mother was Chinese. My nanny was from Mexico, he explained. Languages were important in my house. At 2 p.m., a young woman arrived clutching her side in pain. With all exam rooms full, Dr. Rivera assessed her in the hallway. Possible appendicitis, she told Elise. She needs a hospital, but she's afraid of the cost. No insurance. Morgan overheard and stepped forward. I can help with. Elise cut him off with a sharp look. "Not now," she whispered. "Let me handle this." She spent 20 minutes convincing the woman that delays could be life-threatening. Finally, Dr. Rivera called an ambulance. As the paramedics took the woman away, Morgan said quietly, "I could have paid for her treatment." "And tomorrow? And the next patient?" Elise asked. "This isn't about one-time charity, Morgan. It's about a broken system." By closing time, Morgan's designer shoes were scuffed, and his sweater was stained with coffee. He had filed records, translated for patients, and even mopped the floor after a child got sick in the waiting room. Dr. Rivera shook his hand before leaving. "You worked hard today. We need more volunteers like you." When they were alone, Elise asked, "So, how was your glimpse into my world?" Morgan looked around the now quiet clinic. "Humbling," he admitted. "These people wait hours for basic care that my employees get without thinking." Elise nodded. "That's why I can't give up on medical school completely. Someday, somehow." As they walked out together, Morgan stopped at the door. "Next Saturday, same time?" Elise looked stunned. "That wasn't our deal. One day, you said." "I'm changing the deal," Morgan replied, "and I'm still expecting you at the gala next month." For the first time, Elise saw beyond the billionaire to the man beneath. A man willing to step completely out of his comfort zone not once, but twice. "I'll think about it," she said, but they both knew she would come. Elise stood before the full-length mirror in her small Queen's apartment, hardly recognizing herself. The emerald green evening gown Morgan had sent fit perfectly, making her wonder how he knew her size. A note had accompanied the dress. "No pressure, but if you decide to come." "M. You look beautiful," her mother said from the doorway, having a rare moment of clarity. "Like when you graduated college." Elise smiled, blinking back tears. "Thanks, Mom. The sitter will be here any minute." Outside, a sleek black car waited. The driver opened the door without asking her name, as if he already knew exactly who she was. The Metropolitan Museum of Art glowed against the night sky, its grand entrance lined with photographers and well-dressed guests. Elise hesitated before stepping out of the car, suddenly aware of how far she was from her comfort zone. "Miss Summers?" A young woman with an earpiece appeared. "Mr. Chen asked me to escort you inside." The museum's great hall had been transformed into a spectacular ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over hundreds of New York's wealthiest citizens. Women dripped with diamonds. Men wore watches worth more than Elise's yearly salary. She spotted Morgan across the room, surrounded by people seeking his attention. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every bit the powerful CEO. Nothing like the man who had mopped floors at her clinic last weekend. Morgan looked up, catching her eye. He excused himself immediately and walked toward her. "You came," he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "I said I would," Elise replied, echoing his words from the clinic. "Most people say things they don't mean." Morgan led her toward the bar, "especially to someone they'll never see again." "Is that what happens tonight? We never see each other again?" Elise asked, accepting a glass of champagne. Before Morgan could answer, they were interrupted by an older man with silver hair. "Morgan, there you are. The governor wants to discuss your new tech initiative." He glanced at Elise with obvious curiosity. "Senator Hayes, meet Elise Summers," Morgan said formally. "Elise, Senator Hayes sits on the healthcare committee." Elise shook the senator's hand, surprised by the introduction. "Healthcare committee? That must be challenging work." "Indeed. Though I suspect Morgan invited you because of your medical background," the senator asked. Elise looked confused. "I'm not a doctor. I'm a flight attendant." "Who completed pre-med and knows more about patient care than most of my board members," Morgan added smoothly. "Elise volunteers at Queen's Community Health Center." The conversation shifted to healthcare access in underserved communities. Elise found herself describing the challenges her clinic faced while the senator listened with surprising interest. "You should come visit our facility," Elise said boldly. "See what healthcare really looks like for most people." The senator looked taken aback but intrigued. "Perhaps I will." As dinner was announced, a commotion erupted across the room. An elderly woman had collapsed near the dessert table. "Call 911. Someone shouted. Without hesitation, Elise rushed over, kneeling beside the woman in her expensive gown. I have medical training. Give her space. The woman was barely breathing. Elise checked her pulse, then looked up at the concerned crowd. Does anyone have a pen? A regular ballpoint pen? Morgan appeared with one instantly. Elise removed the ink cartridge and outer casing, creating a makeshift airway tube. She's having an allergic reaction, Elise explained, working quickly. This will help her breathe until paramedics arrive. The crowd watched in stunned silence as this unknown woman in green performed an emergency tracheotomy with steady hands. When paramedics arrived minutes later, they confirmed Elise had saved the woman's life. As the excitement died down, Elise found herself surrounded by guests asking questions about her medical background. Across the room, Morgan watched with a small smile. The senator approached him again. "Remarkable woman," the senator commented. "Just a flight attendant, you said." "No," Morgan corrected. "I never said just anything. Elise is extraordinary, and she just showed all of us exactly why." For the first time in years, Morgan felt truly proud to have someone by his side at one of these events. Someone real in a room full of pretense. 3 weeks after the gala, Elise sat in her small kitchen staring at the letter in her hands. The medical school admissions committee had reviewed her application and wanted an interview. She could hardly believe it. Morgan had kept his promise not to interfere with her application. The school had no idea about her connection to one of the world's richest men. This opportunity was hers alone, earned through her perfect pre-med grades from years ago and her continued volunteer work. Her phone buzzed with a text from Morgan. "Lunch today? I'm back from Tokyo." Their unusual friendship had continued over the past months. Morgan still volunteered at the clinic every other Saturday. Elise had attended 2 more of his events, always feeling out of place but increasingly confident. They spoke almost daily, though neither acknowledged that their arrangement had long exceeded its original terms. When Elise arrived at the restaurant, a small, quiet place Morgan had discovered during one of his clinic visits, he was already waiting. "You look tired," she said, noting the dark circles under his eyes. 36 hours of meetings will do that," Morgan replied. "But I closed the deal. Chentech will open 5 new research facilities across Asia." "Congratulations," Elise smiled. "Though I don't know how you do it. I'm exhausted just from my regular flights." Morgan studied her face. "Something's different. What happened?" Elise hesitated, then showed him the letter. "I got an interview for medical school." Morgan's face lit up. "That's incredible. When did you apply?" "After our night at the airport," Elise admitted. "It seemed crazy, but something about our conversation made me think it wasn't too late." She didn't mention the second part, that her mother's condition had worsened significantly in recent weeks. The timing couldn't be worse. "This calls for a celebration," Morgan said, ordering champagne. As they ate, Morgan shared his own news. "I'm restructuring Chentech's healthcare division, creating affordable medical technology for clinics like yours." "Because of our deal?" Elise asked, surprised. "Because it makes business sense," Morgan said, then smiled. "And maybe because of what I've seen at the clinic." The waiter brought their dessert when Elise's phone rang. She recognized her mother's caregiver's number and answered immediately. "She fell," the caregiver said, voice shaking. "The ambulance took her to Queen's Memorial. They're saying she needs specialized care." The color drained from Elise's face. "I'll be right there." Morgan insisted on driving her to the hospital. In the emergency room, doctors explained that her mother's Alzheimer's had progressed to a stage requiring round-the-clock specialized care not covered by her insurance. "I can't afford that," Elise whispered when the doctor left. "And now medical school, too. It's impossible." Morgan stood by silently, knowing better than to offer money directly. Elise's pride would never allow it. 2 days later, Elise received a call from a care facility specializing in Alzheimer's treatment. "We've reviewed your mother's case," the administrator explained. "She's been selected for our research program. All costs will be covered." "There must be some mistake," Elise said. "I didn't apply for any program." "It's a new initiative," the woman explained vaguely. "Your mother meets all criteria." It took Elise one phone call to discover Morgan's involvement. She drove straight to his office, bypassing security by mentioning his name. "You had no right," she said when she found him in his corner office. Morgan didn't pretend not to understand. I didn't do it for you. The research will help our new products. Don't lie to me, Elise said firmly. I never asked for charity. It's not charity, Morgan insisted. It's what friends do. Is that what we are? Friends, Elise asked. Or am I your pet project? Your glimpse into how the other half lives? The hurt in Morgan's eyes was genuine. You know me better than that. Elise softened slightly. I need to do this on my own terms, Morgan. My mother, medical school, it has to be my journey. Even if it's harder, he asked quietly. Especially then, she replied. That's something you wouldn't understand. She left his office, grateful for his help but determined to find her own path forward. Neither realized they had reached a crossroads from which their relationship might never recover. 6 months passed. The seasons changed from spring to summer, and summer to fall. Morgan's office overlooked Central Park, where trees now blazed with orange and red. He stood at the window, hardly seeing the beautiful view. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, Mr. Chen, his assistant reminded him. Morgan nodded without turning around. I'll be there. On his desk sat an invitation to the Queen's Community Health Center fundraiser. He received it 3 weeks ago but hadn't responded. He hadn't been back to volunteer since his argument with Elise. Across the city, Elise hurried across the medical school campus. Her white coat still felt strange, like someone else's clothes she was borrowing. At 36, she was the oldest first-year student, but she'd quickly proven herself as one of the most dedicated. Summers, wait up, called Javier, a fellow student. Are you heading to Professor Garcia's lecture? Camp today, Elise replied. I have to check on my mother. The specialized care facility had worked wonders for her mother, whose condition had stabilized. Elise visited 3 times a week, fitting the visits between classes and her reduced flight schedule. She still worked weekends as a flight attendant to pay for her apartment and books. She hadn't seen Morgan since that day in his office. He had respected her wishes and kept his distance, though she sometimes wondered if he still volunteered at the clinic. That evening, Elise's phone rang while she studied at her kitchen table. Hello. Elise, it's Dr. Rivera from the clinic. Is everything okay? Elise asked, immediately concerned. Yes, but I wanted to let you know something. The Morgan Chen Foundation just donated $5 million to our center. We can finally update everything. Equipment, building, staff. Elise sat down slowly. When did this happen? Today. No press, no ceremony. Just a check and a letter. After hanging up, Elise stared at her phone for a long time. Finally, she opened her contact list and found Morgan's number. Her thumb hovered over it before she put the phone down again. Meanwhile, Morgan sat in his empty penthouse, looking at flight schedules on his laptop. Chentech was expanding into Europe, requiring his presence in London for at least 6 months. The thought of leaving New York left him feeling oddly empty. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Airline strike looms. Pilots' union threatens holiday shutdown. Morgan clicked on the article, wondering if Elise would be affected. He hadn't deleted her number, though he'd come close many times. The next morning, Elise stood at the nurse's station in her clinical rotation when a familiar face appeared on the hospital TV. Morgan was being interviewed about Chentech's new medical technology division. Our goal is making advanced medical devices accessible to all communities, he was saying. Healthcare shouldn't be a luxury. Elise felt a rush of complicated emotions. Pride in what he was doing, regret for how they'd left things, anger that he'd moved on so completely from their friendship. Later that week, Morgan packed for London. His assistant had arranged everything: apartment, car service, meetings. One last thing, she said, handing him an envelope. Your invitation to the Governor's Healthcare Innovation Summit next month. Should I decline since you'll be in London? Morgan took the envelope, noticing the list of speakers. Halfway down, a name caught his eye: Elise Summers, Queen's Community Health Center, medical student representative. No, he said, feeling his heart rate quicken. I'll fly back for this. On the other side of the city, Elise perceived a different envelope. Inside was a check from the Morgan Chen Foundation, a full medical school scholarship. A note was attached. This isn't charity. It's an investment in a doctor who will change healthcare. No strings attached. M. Elise held the check, torn between her pride and the reality of her mounting student loans. After a long moment, she placed it in her desk drawer, neither accepting nor rejecting it. That night, both Morgan and Elise looked up at the same night sky, each wondering if the brief connection they'd shared had meant as much to the other as it had to them. Each too proud, too uncertain to make the first move to repair what had been broken. 1 year after their chance meeting on that stormy night, Morgan Chen stood before a crowd of reporters, investors, and medical professionals. Behind him, a modern building gleamed in the morning sunlight. The sign above the entrance read, Chen Institute for Alzheimer's Research and Community Care. Today marks not just the opening of a research facility, Morgan said into the microphones, but a new approach to healthcare. Our scientists will work directly with patients. Our innovations will reach people who need them most, not just those who can afford them. Cameras flashed as Morgan cut the ribbon. He had returned from London just yesterday for this event, looking more relaxed than he had in years despite the jet lag. His usual perfectionism had been replaced by something more authentic. As the crowd moved inside for tours, Morgan lingered behind, scanning the faces. He hadn't sent Elise an invitation, respecting the boundaries she had set, but part of him still hoped. Inside the building's east wing, the community care center, a plaque caught the attention of visitors. The Maria Summers wing, named after Elise's mother. Across town, Elise sat in her medical school library, surrounded by textbooks. Her first year was nearly complete, with grades that placed her at the top of her class. The scholarship check from Morgan remained in her drawer, untouched. She had managed without it, working extra flights and taking out smaller loans. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Rivera. Watching the news? Chen Institute opening today. The community wing looks amazing. Elise switched on the library television, where the ceremony was being broadcast. Her breath caught when she saw Morgan speaking about accessible healthcare with genuine passion. Then the camera panned to the Maria Summers wing sign. Without thinking, Elise gathered her books and rushed out. An hour later, Morgan was answering questions from investors when his assistant touched his arm. "Someone's here to see you," she whispered, in the East Wing lobby. Morgan excused himself and walked quickly through the building. When he turned the corner into the lobby, he stopped. Elise stood there in her white medical coat, having come straight from school. "You named it after my mother," she said simply. Morgan approached slowly. "I should have asked first." "Yes, you should have," Elise agreed, but there was no anger in her voice. "Why did you do it?" "Because her story matters," Morgan replied. "And because caring for her led you to make choices that taught me what real courage looks like." Elise looked around at the beautiful facility. "This isn't what I expected when a billionaire CEO and a flight attendant got stranded in an airport." "Life rarely turns out as expected," Morgan said. "Sometimes it's better." They walked through the building together, talking about the year they'd spent apart. Morgan described his work in London and how it had changed his company's direction. Elise shared stories from medical school and her mother's improving condition. In the research wing, they stopped before a wall of windows overlooking a garden where patients could walk safely. "I never cashed your scholarship check," Elise admitted. "I know," Morgan said. "The foundation told me." "It wasn't about the money," she explained. "It was about needing to do it myself." Morgan nodded. "I understand that now. I respected your choice." "And I respect what you built here," Elise said. "It's exactly what healthcare should be." As they stood there, a comfortable silence between them, Morgan finally asked the question that had been on his mind for months. "The clinic still needs volunteers on Saturdays. Think they could use another pair of hands?" Elise smiled. "Always, though I should warn you. Dr. Rivera expects volunteers to commit for the long term." "I'm not going anywhere," Morgan said quietly. "Not this time." Outside, reporters were still gathered, wondering where the famous CEO had disappeared to. None would have guessed he was simply standing beside a medical student, making plans to volunteer at a community clinic on Saturday. Neither Morgan nor Elise knew exactly what their future held, but they both understood that when different worlds truly collide, the impact can create something entirely new, something better than either world alone could ever be.